My wife cheated on me and took our kids to Sweden. I used a smart plan to bring her back to the US thinking I would get revenge. However, a paternity test showed that only one of the children was mine. Get ready. This is going to be a long story. I'm a 37-year-old man, married to my 36-year-old wife for 11 years, and we have 2 sons, aged 3 and 8. They are everything to me. We first met working together at a store years ago. When our first son was born, my mother visited to see him and mentioned he didn't look like either of us. She said this quietly, not in front of others. Honestly, I've never been good at seeing who a newborn looks like because their faces still need to grow into any clear features. However, many older family members seem to spot resemblances easily. I didn't take my mother's words seriously because she tends to stir up trouble. My love for my child was too strong to be shaken by her comments. But then, another problem came up. I noticed a notification on my wife's phone from someone named Charlie. This Charlie was just a name on her phone, but we knew a Charlie who was the brother of a coworker from our old job. I wasn't sure if it was the same Charlie, and I couldn't check more details because my wife was in the same room. The message read, "I'll remember last night for a long time." I only saw a part of it. This felt odd because she was supposed to be at the movies with her friends that night. This made me very suspicious. It just didn't feel right. When I had the chance, I checked her phone. I opened the chat with Charlie, and the first thing I did was look at the profile picture. Yes, it was the Charlie we knew from the store. He looked a bit older, but I recognized him right away. I hadn't kept in touch with him, and I really didn't think she had either. The whole situation felt wrong. Honestly, I started to feel scared about what I might find in the messages. A part of me wanted to just put the phone down and forget everything, but a stronger part urged me not to back down and to just look at the messages. So I did. That was enough to confirm my fears. It was clear they had been together the previous night. She had lied to me and left our house for that reason alone. It's hard to describe how I felt discovering her lie and realizing she was cheating on me. The worst part was not knowing how long this had been going on. Had she been cheating since the time we were dating and Charlie was working at the store? Did it start a week ago? Or had they been meeting up regularly throughout our marriage? It was driving me crazy. I knew I had to confront her, but I didn't know how I would do it. The first thing I did was take photos and screenshots of the chat, which I sent to myself. I needed evidence so there would be no chance for her to deny anything. It would really upset me if she tried to lie about it. When she came home, I didn't say anything at first because I was trying to organize my thoughts. I wanted to think about every angle, and if I was going to confront her, I needed to make sure I could ask all the right questions to catch her if she lied. The first day, I stayed silent. But the next day, I was ready for the confrontation. I started by casually asking her if she had heard from Charlie recently. She looked shocked for a moment and tried to pretend she didn't know what I was talking about. She asked, "Who's Charlie?" I reminded her that he was our co-worker's brother. Then she said, "Oh," but she dragged it out. She didn't answer my question, so I asked again, "Have you heard from Charlie lately?" I could tell she was trying to figure out if I was just asking by chance or if I knew something. She paused for a long time before answering, "Oh no, I haven't heard from him in a long time." I think my face showed something because she seemed to realize I wasn't just asking for no reason. She must have guessed I knew something. Then she changed her story. "Actually, I think we might have spoken recently." "Why didn't you tell me?" "We haven't talked to him in so long." "How is he?" I asked. "He's fine, I guess. We don't talk much, so I can't say much about him," she replied and shrugged. "You're right. Maybe I'll reach out to him. Do you think that's a good idea?" Her response made it clear she was trying to play it cool, but I could see through it. "We could catch up with him. I think that would be nice," I said. She froze after I mentioned this, so I asked her what was wrong, using a tone that hinted I knew more. I didn't mean to, but I started to chuckle and shook my head. "You know what?" She sounded almost angry as she responded. "What do you know?" "I know about you and Charlie, clearly," I replied. "Please don't pretend like I don't know what's going on because you know I do. Let's skip the excuses because they'll just make me really angry." She went silent for a long while and then began to cry. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. I've seen her cry before, but this time it made me more upset than ever. It infuriated me because it seemed she didn't find her actions with Charlie upsetting, but now she was overwhelmed by being caught. I was truly upset. After a while, she looked up with tears in her eyes and told me she was sorry. She said it happened just once, that it was a big mistake, and she regretted it right after. She explained she felt vulnerable and made the worst decision possible. I doubted her claim that it was only once. So I decided to bluff with confidence. I told her straight that I knew it wasn't just one time. Tell me the truth, the whole truth, because I already know everything, I said firmly. Charlie's brother, our old co-worker, told me everything. That's when she started crying again, this time even louder and more frustrating. I said, tell me the truth. That's when she admitted that she had been with him a few times, but not more than 10. I tried to stay calm, but I ended up grabbing a ceramic ornament from the table and throwing it at the wall. Can you believe she tried to downplay her cheating by saying it was less than 10 times? I was shocked. I told her, I want a divorce. I got up to leave the room, but before I did, I said one more thing. I'm taking our kids for a paternity test, and that's not up for discussion. She looked completely shocked, more upset than I'd ever seen her. I didn't care much about her reaction, though I was a bit worried she might do something drastic. I called my kids and told them we were going out for ice cream. It was late, but not too late, and I needed to make sure she would calm down before I returned. I could handle her meltdown, but I didn't want my boys to see their mom like that. It wasn't about feeling sorry for her. It was about protecting my sons. She didn't seem concerned as I took them out. I returned to her with my kids waiting at the door, and I whispered to her to pull herself together before I came back in an hour. After that, I turned around and walked out with them. As promised, I took my sons out for ice cream, which was surprisingly enjoyable. It felt like a brief moment of peace and happiness amid the turmoil. I love my children deeply, as any parent should, and they always bring light to my days. The hardest part was this nagging thought in my head that the kids I was having fun with might not actually be mine. Can you imagine how painful that thought is? These children have been part of my life for years. I just had to keep hoping that they were indeed mine. As much as I dreaded the idea of them growing up in a broken home, it seemed better for them to have both a mother and a father, right? But the truth is, I didn't know if I could stay in their lives if it turned out they weren't mine. You might judge me for thinking like that, but it's much harder than it sounds. I'd always be reminded that they were the result of my wife's infidelity, and I don't think it's fair for them to see them through that lens. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. My wife and I continued living in the same house after everything blew up, and we barely spoke more than a few words to each other all week. I was sleeping on the couch, and if you're wondering why I didn't ask her to leave, it's because I didn't want to upset my sons just yet. Eventually, they'd have to understand what was happening, but I was trying to delay that. At the end of the week, I handed her the divorce papers. She started crying again, and I began to wonder if her tears were real or just because she couldn't handle facing the consequences of what she'd done. I told her not to make the divorce difficult. Just sign the papers, and during the divorce, we would get a court-ordered paternity test. I said if she really hadn't been unfaithful, there was nothing to worry about. That's straightforward, isn't it? So, what I'm about to share is where things stand now, and it's why I'm writing this post, because I didn't expect any complications with what seemed like a straightforward divorce. I thought I could handle everything, but with this new complication, I really need help. One day, before I left for work, my wife told me she wasn't feeling well and wouldn't be going to work. She looked like she had been crying all night, but I didn't care. I left the house and left her with our sons. I didn't think there was anything to worry about. It was the weekend, so they could spend the day with their mother instead of needing to go to a cousin's place. But apparently, there was a lot I should have worried about. When I got home, I immediately knew something was wrong because the house was so quiet. I called out for my wife and sons, but no one answered. That made me anxious because, as far as I knew, they had nowhere to be that late at night. I went straight to my son's room and instantly felt something was wrong. The room wasn't cleaned out, but it was much emptier than usual. I checked the closet and saw that many of their clothes were missing. That's when I started to panic. I ran to our bedroom, opened the closet, and saw that many of my wife's clothes were gone too. Some suitcases were missing as well. It suddenly hit me. She had taken our children and left. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation that I would later discover, but that seemed unlikely. The fact that they weren't home, and there were fewer clothes and suitcases, made it clear that something unusual was happening. I checked my phone, but there were no messages or calls from her. It was obvious she didn't want me to know what she had done. Yes, my wife had somehow taken my children, and I had no idea where they were. I can't even describe what I was feeling at that moment because it was a mix of everything: worry, panic, anger, fear, and confusion. I called everyone I could think of, but none of them had heard from my wife, or at least that's what they said. I called relatives in the city, and those in nearby cities. I called her friends, and even some of her co-workers, but I had no idea where she was, and she wasn't answering her phone. I spent 2 whole days without knowing where she had taken my sons. While I didn't think they were in danger since it seemed like a planned decision, I was still on edge. After those 2 days, I was ready to call the police because I needed to find out where she had taken my kids. I knew involving the authorities would make things even more stressful, so I made one last effort to contact the people closest to her. One of her best friends had spoken to her, but didn't know where she was. Finally, when I called her parents again, they told me where she had gone. She had taken our children to her parents' place in Sweden. Yes, she had flown our kids out of the country. At that point, there was no confusion about what I was feeling. It was pure rage. I don't think I've ever felt that angry in my life, and I had no way to let it out because she still wasn't answering my calls. I wanted to break things, throw things, and scream at someone. But instead, I just ended up tearing apart the house and yelling at the first person who even slightly annoyed me. So, this is where things stand right now. My wife is in another country with our sons, refusing to answer my calls, and I don't even know exactly where her parents live in Sweden since I've never been there. Sure, I could go through the trouble of getting her parents to tell me, but then what? Would I forcibly bring my children back to the US? What would my plan be if I took time off work, flew there, and confronted her? I know I can find her and our sons if I really try, but I need to figure out what I'd do once I did. I'm completely lost on what to do next, and that's why I'm asking for help from all of you. First of all, I'm pretty sure there are legal rules about taking children, especially when we have joint custody, out of the country without both parents agreeing. It doesn't work like that, and I know this for sure. So, if anyone here has more legal knowledge, I'd really appreciate some advice on what steps I should take. Thank you. Edit. Well, she finally reached out to me, and I'm not proud of how I completely lost it shouting at her. I needed to let it out, and I finally got the chance. I think I yelled at her for a good 10 minutes straight. When I finished, there was silence for about 30 seconds before she said she had only taken the kids to visit her parents. I immediately told her she was lying, with a lot of cursing mixed in. Does she really think I'm that stupid? She took our kids to visit her parents without telling me? She bought 2 plane tickets, disappeared from the house, flew to another continent, and didn't contact me for almost a week, just for a visit? She tried to gaslight me, but she wasn't very good at it, and I didn't fall for it. At that point, I just hung up the phone. I've been in a terrible mood ever since. Edit 2. You all are amazing. Someone in the comments mentioned international child abduction and the Hague Convention on the civil aspects of international child abduction. That cleared up a lot of my questions about the legal side of getting kids back when they've been taken to another country. I'm now ready to reach out to a lawyer to do whatever it takes to bring my kids home, and honestly, I'd be more than happy to see her face the consequences for what she's done. I'll keep you all updated on what happens next. Update 1. Hey everyone, I've got a big update on the situation with my wife who took my children and fled to Sweden. Not only did she take them without my consent, but she didn't even ask me for permission. She just took off with them while I was at work. Then she refused to contact me for nearly a week, which made me extremely angry. I've now contacted a lawyer, different from my divorce lawyer, to help me get my children back. I made this decision thanks to a commenter on my previous post who informed me about an international treaty related to child abduction. This has allowed me to make significant progress. The treaty is called the Hague Convention on the civil aspects of international child abduction, and I'll do my best to explain the main points to you all. Keep in mind, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm just explaining this in simple terms. If a parent takes a child to another state without the other parent's permission, it can be considered abduction or kidnapping. With the police on your side, It should be fairly straightforward to resolve since the police work within the whole country. But what happens if the child is taken out of the country? American police can't help directly, and that's where the international treaty comes in. The treaty looks at where the child usually lives, known as their habitual residence, and whether they were taken away illegally. In my children's case, their habitual residence was clearly in the US, so it was easy to prove that they were wrongfully removed. This is where my lawyer was extremely helpful. He explained the process to me, and I've tried to explain it to you as best as I understood it. After this point, my lawyer took over, handling everything from filing documents with the Hague Convention to contacting local authorities and taking care of other legal details. I didn't worry too much about the specifics since I trusted him to manage it all. I made it clear to my wife that I had called the police and hired a lawyer to help me get our sons back, but she didn't seem concerned. She responded by saying she wouldn't just sit back and let me tear the family apart, which I thought was ridiculous. After all, taking our sons to another country was already breaking the family apart, but I knew her excuse was nonsense. To me, it was obvious she was more worried about what I might find out with the paternity test. At least that's the conclusion I came to. My lawyer sent a notice to her and her parents in Sweden, warning them about the consequences if she didn't return the children. Sure, it would be straightforward enough to get my sons back with the help of the Hague Treaty and the local police, but my lawyer thought it would be smart to let her know how this could affect her life, especially in a criminal sense. A part of me hoped she would listen to the notice and come back so we could handle things as peacefully and easily as possible. But a darker part of me wanted her to stay stubborn so I could be sure she'd face serious consequences, even ending up in jail. The notice sent to her parents had the same important information, but also mentioned that they could be seen as accomplices to the abduction. The notice gave her a week to return my sons to their home in the United States. Now let me skip ahead and tell you how things played out. Exactly a week later, my in-laws called me. They started with some basic small talk, but it was clear they were struggling to say what they really wanted to say. After several awkward pauses, they finally admitted that they didn't agree with what my wife was doing. They had tried to convince her to come back, but she wouldn't listen. They were asking me to be more patient with her, saying they would keep trying to get her to do the right thing. But I told them I wasn't going to do anything without my lawyer's advice. The deadline we gave her had already passed, so at that point, she deserved whatever was coming to her. After that, she completely stopped answering my calls, although her parents still did. The whole situation was incredibly frustrating, and I felt like I was on the verge of losing my mind. She didn't seem to care at all about the legal trouble she was getting into. The good news is that my lawyer eventually called to tell me that the authorities had given the green light to recover my sons from her. At this point, my emotions were all over the place because I was worried she might do something reckless. Apparently, the Swedish police went to her parents' house, and though they didn't arrest her, she finally promised to send my children back to their home in the United States. I was extremely relieved to hear this because it meant my sons would finally be back home. We could put this whole nightmare behind us and maybe try to return to normal lives. My sons did come back, but my wife was nowhere to be found. I had very mixed feelings about this. The reunion with my boys was emotional and full of tears since I hadn't seen them in several weeks. I was so glad to have them back, but the fact that she wasn't there drove me crazy. Part of me was happy she wasn't around, but it also meant the divorce couldn't move forward, and she wouldn't face the law for what she had done. I tried calling her, but she didn't answer. Life went on for a while until I finally found the courage to take my sons for a paternity test. I knew it wouldn't be usable in court, but I had to know the truth. That's the main reason I felt she had run away with them. I can't describe how my heart broke when I saw the results. The 3-year-old was mine, which was a relief to read, but the 8-year-old, words can't express the hopelessness I felt at that moment. I found out that the child I had fought so hard for, who was right beside me, wasn't mine. I had spent so many years raising and loving this boy, and now I learned he was someone else's? I have to admit, the hopelessness and depression I felt made me want to lash out. I hated it so much. I took him for another test, hoping the first one was wrong, but the results were the same. From that moment on, every time I looked at my son, all I felt was pure sadness. I didn't feel any anger toward him, but I wondered if I could keep loving him, knowing he wasn't mine. I worried that I might start favoring the child I knew was mine. He was born because of my wife's cheating, And even though that wasn't his fault, I knew I'd always think of her betrayal when I looked at him. I still loved him, but I wasn't sure if that would last. The hardest part was that my wife wasn't around for me to express my anger. I tried calling her, but she never answered, just like I expected. I thought about calling her parents, but I didn't want to drag them into this because they were good people. Finally, I did call her parents, but only because I had a plan to bring her back to the country. I told them I needed to talk to my wife and that I wanted us to be a family again. 2 days later, she called me, and I pretended to say that I knew she left because I almost broke the family apart. I told her I did the paternity test and found out both our sons were mine. I apologized and said I wouldn't go through with the divorce. I even told her I'd keep apologizing until she forgave me. She believed it all. She was surprised when I mentioned the paternity test, but she tried not to show it. She came back to the United States yesterday, and we met for a short, emotional reunion. But she has no idea that I only did this to get her back into the country. I'm staying at a hotel now because I told her I'd leave the house to her for a few days so it wouldn't be awkward. But it's about to get very awkward, and I'm ready to start the divorce again. I'll make sure the police get to her first so she can't run away. I'll keep you all updated on what happens next. Update 2. Life is hard, but I'm glad things have finally calmed down a bit, even if I'm not as happy as I was a year ago. Eventually, I was able to get my wife back into the United States, just like I told you all before. As soon as she was back, I contacted the police and my lawyer to make sure she would face the law for everything she did to me. A few days later, there was a knock at the door while her son was at school. It hurts me to say her son, but I've learned that I need to accept the truth instead of pretending otherwise. And there they were, the police. They asked her to come with them. It wasn't a big scene because she didn't resist or ask many questions. As she looked back at me while being taken away, I couldn't help but smirk at her. She didn't stay in jail long because her family paid her bail, but at least it made it harder for her to skip the country again. This allowed me to move forward with the divorce. The whole divorce process finished before her court case was even done, and honestly, it was more time in court than I ever wanted. The divorce itself was pretty straightforward. After all, she was the one who took off to another country with our kids. The court ordered a paternity test, which confirmed what I already knew, that only one child was mine and the other wasn't. This made it easier for my lawyer to show that she had taken the kids because she knew she had cheated. Even without screenshots, I think my lawyer would have convinced the judge she was unfaithful. It was almost satisfying to watch when the paternity test results were revealed. She looked shocked, and I'll never forget how she stared at me when she realized I knew the truth. I just shook my head and laughed because I had known all along. Since she wasn't only a cheater, but also took my child without permission, technically kidnapping the older boy because I wasn't his biological father, the judge didn't have any sympathy for her. I was given full custody of the younger child, while she kept the 8-year-old. I didn't lose the house, the car, or have to pay any alimony. The judge told her she should find the real father of the child and try to work things out with him. Hearing that made me feel sick because it reminded me that I had been raising another man's child without knowing it. It hurt a lot. After the divorce, it was really hard for me to live with myself after saying goodbye to the boy I thought was my son all these years. I know some people might not understand the decision I made, and maybe it makes me look like a bad person. Maybe I should have just adopted the boy, right? But I hope none of you ever have to make the decision I did, because it's much harder than it seems. As for her crime, she went to court for taking the child out of the country without permission, and I had to be there for every session, as required. I had to give statements, testify, and go through a lot of difficult things, but in the end, she was sent to prison. It wasn't for as long as I had hoped, but because the abduction didn't last long and the children were treated well by their grandparents, she got a shorter sentence. Only one of the children was biologically mine. The judge in this case, unlike the one in the divorce, was pretty lenient. He only gave her 18 months in prison, especially since she still had a child out there who would stay with a relative until she got out. For someone like her, 18 months would be tough, but after all she put me through with the cheating and paternity fraud, I really wished it had been at least 5 years. My lawyer was disappointed with the sentence too. Still, at the end of the day, I got the better side of the divorce, and at least one of the children turned out to be mine. That was probably the only thing that kept me from doing something drastic or falling into a deep depression. I don't know what I would have done otherwise. I also managed to get her put away for kidnapping my child, and I see that as a consequence of her cheating as well. Her life won't be as easy without me, especially with a criminal record. She also lost her job after running off to Sweden without telling anyone. I make sure to tell everyone we know the full story without worrying about protecting her reputation. I have to admit, I enjoy that. I do feel some pity for the child, but hopefully she can get the father to step up, whether that's Charlie or someone else. I assumed it was Charlie, but I didn't want confirmation because it would just make things worse if it wasn't. Her parents called me after everything and apologized deeply. They still want to be in the child's life, and I have a soft spot for them, so I agreed to arrange things with them in the future. The only condition was that I never wanted to see their daughter again. As long as they stick to that, things will be fine for all of us. So, that's it for me. I've been living as a single father, and even though it's tough, it's also rewarding. I just hope I can keep going strong as the years pass. I hope there's something you can all learn from my pain so that you might not have to go through what I did. If you found this story eye-opening or helpful, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more content like this. Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And be sure to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.